Good morning, DawgNation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast, Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Final day before the cocktail party tomorrow. Excited about that. Some of you already there. Many of you making your way down right now. I'll be leaving tomorrow morning. Looking forward to being there. Excited about all of that. I know we're running a little late for our comments here today, so I will bounce in here and get a couple of these, and then we'll find out what else is going on with everybody as we kind of roll to our cool down a little bit later on. So looking forward to all that. Hope you had a happy Halloween last night. Hope you're looking forward to a great weekend, too. I'll see you tonight, Peachtree TV, on all of that. Good one for us tonight, Prince Avenue Christian, Hebron Christian. Really fun battle there. So excited about a big weekend. Cliff Dog says, I just posted on Instagram and I tagged you. My son wanted 8 years. He's 8 years old, wanted to be sure you saw him in his lousy, stinking gator shirt. So I'll have to take a look at that. I am not the most Instagram active person, but I'll have to try to find that because I would love to see that, Cliff. Thank you so much for sharing that. I will look for that, and I'm sure somebody will try to help get that to me as well. So that's awesome, Cliff. I'm glad to hear that. DT looking for at least 5 sacks. That's an exciting thing to think about. That obviously go a long way towards preserving a Georgia victory. That'd be nice to see. Yard Dog wondering about quarterback recruiting. We'll talk more about that here, perhaps, too. Let me pop off here and see what's happening on the YouTube side of things as well. In a moment, we're going to get into what I think is a pretty sad attempt by Florida to troll Georgia. I think it's sad that this is what they've come to in this rivalry. We'll talk about that here coming up in just a moment. Brodo Baggins says Darth Kirby is going to show the Gators the true power of the dog side. I like that. Keith Spencer checking in. I'm glad you're here. Paul Moon, the subject of Anthony Evans. We'll also talk about that, the fact that it appears that Evans going to be out for Saturday. I'm actually going to bring that up with Jeff Sintel a bit today, too. Gregory Bradley, good to see him in here. He's fired up for the rivalry game. You love that. Lesko looking forward to seeing Boom back on the sideline. Obviously, after not making the trip to Texas. Yes, that'll be nice to see. This is sort of Boom's home game, too, right? Pretty close down there in the, Savannah home to the Jacksonville area. So a lot of fun here today. So we got a lot of big things here coming up. We'll get more of your comments on the other side as a part of our RS Andrews cool down. We're heading towards a great Friday, though. A lot of fun golden shoes, great hype video that goes back and look at some of the history of the Georgia-Florida rivalry here on this show. Our buddy Cody Chafin's done a really good job on that. So let's fire up the animation. We'll tell you everything about today's show. I think you're going to like it. Good morning, DawgNation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Jam-packed today. Recruiting stuff coming up with Jeff Sintel. Final thoughts on some of the big games of the weekend. We've got a great retrospective looking back on the history of the Georgia-Florida rivalry as it is kind of played out on this show. That's going to be a lot of fun. A lot of good vibes with a bunch of golden shoes, kind of an old-school, traditional Friday shoes dump here, getting some of those on the screen for you here today. I'm also going to tell you on the show why I think a recent Georgia-Florida game from the past, pretty recent past, could actually, if it could play out again in some form or fashion on Saturday, could speak pretty well, not for just Georgia's continued dominance in this rivalry, but also what Georgia hopes to do the rest of this season. We'll give you that. And off the top of the show, I think the lousy, stinking Gators have made what I'll call a fairly lame attempt at some trolling of UGA, but perhaps, maybe, this is just the spice we need to kind of stir things up for the rivalry game on Saturday. I'll tell you why that's true here coming up in just a moment. All of it on the way as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
They are the lousy, stinking Gators for a reason. A pathetic excuse for a program, and it has been now for quite some time. You would think that maybe they would just want to sneak into Jacksonville on Saturday, perhaps under the cover of darkness, not try to stir things up too much, certainly not kind of poke the beast, poke the bear, if you will. ahead of the game. And yet Florida, who has a long history of unrequited trash talk in this series, writing checks with mouths that the team on the field could not cash, apparently ahead of this upcoming game tomorrow, Florida sort of once again just can't help itself from stirring the pot. I mean, think about all the stuff that we've had in this series on that. Dumb things that like what Chauncey Gardner would have said. You know, Dan Mullen once with the spring game attendance that was a troll of how long it had been since Georgia won a national championship. How has that worked out for Florida, obviously? You know, things like that, very much out of style now that Georgia has won, you know, so much over the course of the last couple of years. Florida just has a history of, even when they can't back it up on the field, trying to run their mouths, trying to generate some attention here that way. And frankly, I think it's a little bit sad. We perhaps have an example of this here today. Now, if you're just scrolling quick on your social media feed, you might not know this. It feels pretty benign, perhaps. Yet the post also has more than 1,000 likes already, which gives you an idea that certain people seem to be all kind of seeing this in the same way. Certainly what appears to be a little bit of an attempt at trolling by Florida against Georgia out of the game. This comes from the official Florida Athletics account, at Florida Gators on the X platform. I'll show you this here on the screen. So the graphic says, "Drive safe, Florida, Georgia, Jacksonville, Florida." The caption says, "We'll see you in Jacksonville for Florida, Georgia this weekend, but no matter where you're coming from, get there safely with a designated driver." So most people are interpreting this as a swipe by Florida at some of the driving arrests that obviously Georgia's dealt with. Now, let me give you two reasons quickly. And if you don't mind, let's keep that on the screen just for another second here. Thank you. Let me give you two reasons why I think this is really sad. First of all, Florida values itself seemingly as an academic institution, they would say, of some prestige. Yet apparently they don't teach adverbs at Florida, because this graphic, as sort of pathetic of a trolling attempt as it is, I would also say is bad grammar too, because safe is an adverb. Typically adverbs have ly at the end. I think good grammar here would be drive safely as opposed to drive safe. Perhaps a little bit of a grammatical error by Florida in the attempt at trolling here for UGA. But beyond that, like, how far has Florida fallen? I mean, be serious here for a moment. And, you know, I think that all of us value the SEC. We value and we can take that down now. We value the rivalries of the SEC. How far has this rival of Georgia fallen that more than 1,000 Florida fans have gone to the, you know, social media with their little, you know, chubby fingers, and they're hitting that like button over and over, and, oh, we love this, we like this. It's like at one point in time, Florida would have aspired to greatness on the field. You ever seen like is it the Pawn Stars meme of, hey man, can we have a team that competes for a championship? No, best we can do is trolling a team that does win championships on social media. Like, this is all they have. This is all they've got. That ability to troll Georgia on social media over, and we've acknowledged, obviously, you know, Georgia players do need to drive, you know, more safely. There's no doubt about that. That's well documented, of course. That's a real thing. But, you know, the idea that ahead of the game, we're in kind of election season. You know, this is sort of like your closing argument in the election season. You know, you get up there and you do the big speech and you kind of make your case for why you're the better candidate. This is Florida's closing pitch. This is Florida's final argument for its own cause here. The Friday before the game, they're making a troll about some sort of, driving issue for Georgia players. You know, this is sort of a glass houses issue, I would say, considering the fact that, Florida's last national championship team, as long ago as that was, had a player that allegedly killed a guy. I mean, it's like, I don't know that we quite want to be going down that road for Florida, but nonetheless, that's kind of, where we are here, that they're going to kind of be sort of making those jabs at Georgia for the play arrest thing. And to make matters worse here, the fact that, this is sort of all Florida has to hold on to, all they have to grab hold on to here right now. To make matters worse, you had a bunch of people in the comment section, little trollish Florida fans with their, with their Twitter fingers, tagging Trevor Etienne, obviously Etienne, the former Gator. He did have a driving arrest, and that's a serious thing. We don't make light of that. We never have. We also don't condemn a lot of guys for that, Etienne included. Etienne, I think, made a mistake. I think if he had a chance to do things over again, would have done things differently. but Trevor Etienne was never going to be the kind of guy that Georgia was going to cast aside because of that. Like a lot of young people, use moments in your life as a training ground to get better, make better decisions going forward. After all, that's what college, I think, is supposed to be about. And by the way, we extend that same grace to players who don't play for Georgia, who play for other programs. We're not running around here heavy-handed all the time of, tisk-tisk of who got in trouble and who did what, because, frankly, we've got better things to talk about. Florida obviously doesn't. But that's kind of the way things are for us. And yet when you see all of these people kind of tagging Trevor Etienne in this post, using this as an opportunity to mock him individually, Florida kind of creating the permission structure for that to take place by its own post, all of a sudden now we revisit something we talked about yesterday. And all of a sudden now, we said, hey, a lot of people have tried to make a narrative about Trevor Etienne against his old team, and somehow there's extra juice for Etienne against Florida because of the fact that he used to play for the lousy, stinking Gators. And we've said, as much as that's been kind of tried to be pushed here this week, it certainly doesn't seem like there's going to be all that much to that. You're probably just not going to get anything real out of that. Napier said that. Kirby said that. We've already seen instances this year when former Georgia players have played against UGA. There will be more of that in the future, that there's just probably not a whole lot of extra juice about Etienne playing his old team. Well, now we may need to revise those remarks, because now you got Florida doing this on social media to the extent that that's going to permeate here. I'm imagining, I don't think Kirby Smart will use this, but maybe somebody close to Etienne might be like, hey, they're making fun of you in particular here. They're making fun of you individually here. Yeah, you made a mistake, but we're not condemning you over that mistake, and yet Florida seems to want to do that here right now, and certainly their fans seem to want to drag your name through the mud over all of this. All of a sudden now, maybe there is a little extra juice around this for Etienne, because, certainly the impression you got is Etienne was sort of an upstanding citizen while he played for Florida. Even with the driving issue that Etienne dealt with before the season began, Kirby Smart has vehemently defended and complimented Etienne every step of the way. He legitimately seems to be a good guy, but in this particular case, I would say somewhat unfairly, the entire institution of Florida athletics using social media to make fun of guys like Trevor Etienne here, maybe that does kind of turn up the heat on this rivalry game here a bit. There's at least one Georgia player who seems to think that's true. Go back to earlier this week. A Floridian, I guess by birth, a Florida native, Arian Smith, was talking about, his viewpoint on playing Florida, what he assumes that Trevor Etienne's viewpoint is on playing Florida, and he used a word to describe that we have heard Georgia players use before about this rivalry game against the team I like to call the lousy, stinking Gators. This is what Arian Smith, a Florida native, said about Trevor Etienne playing against his old team here this week.
Coach always tells us and emphasizes connection and on our team, so he just says how they they didn't have what we have over here, so he takes a lot of gratitude in that being over here. So he didn't really talk about the game yet. I'm sure as the week goes we'll talk more, but I'm sure it's personal for him just like it's personal for me because that's where I'm from. So
we've heard Georgia players say that, right? Oh, this game is personal for me. Nolan Smith said that years ago. By the way, we're going to revisit Nolan Smith here in a couple of minutes, but this idea that a game is personal. Arian Smith says it's personal for me because I am a Floridian. He said, I assume it's personal for Trevor Etienne too. Well, before, today, maybe it wasn't, but maybe it's a little bit more personal now because it sort of feels like a lot of people are kind of using social media as a way of making fun of you going into a game like this. It's only human nature that you might be fueled by that perhaps just a little bit. Ultimately, though, I'll totally acknowledge this, that this is probably not that big of a thing, as I said to begin the show. If you're just scrolling your social media feed, you happen to stumble across this, you might not even notice it. That's because, it's not a, I would say, outstanding attempt at trolling. It's sort of a, kind of lightweight, bantamweight JV version of that, which is pretty much a description of everything that Florida's program has been about for a good number of years. So if you're just kind of half paying attention on your phone, many people do, you might not even notice this. But it's at least significant enough that we can perhaps put to bed and put to rest one of the concerns that some people might have about this game for Georgia. For instance, I heard Joel Klatt. We're also going to revisit something that Joel Klatt said later on in the show too, but I heard Joel Klatt, the Fox analyst, he was making his official prediction for Georgia and Florida, And he said that he likes Georgia to win the game, Florida to cover. One of the reasons why he thinks this will be inside the point spread is because he thinks that Georgia will be overlooking Florida to the road game next week against Ole Miss, or the game after that against Tennessee. He thinks that Georgia might be overlooking Florida, and that might give these lousy, stinking Gators a chance to keep it a little closer there on Saturday. Well, I would push back against that because we saw Georgia playing a pretty bad Florida team in 2022 ahead of a major showdown the following week against a Tennessee team that was going to be the number one team in the country. Georgia still blew doors on Florida that day. So we have statistical evidence that Georgia, when it had a chance to look past Florida to a much better opponent the following week, did not do that as recently as 2 years ago. But also, if there was any doubt that Florida really could be overlooked by Georgia, there's always some little thing that even in the bad years for Florida, which is most of the years lately, even in the bad years, somebody somewhere does something. It's a player who trash talks in a way that he has no chance of backing up. It's a coach who does something goofy. It's some intern with access to the social media accounts, like this case right now, where Florida does something just before the game just to get Georgia's attention. And this may be that here right now. I would have told you I don't believe that Georgia does overlook Florida for the reasons that I mentioned a moment ago. But if there was ever any doubt that was the case, then maybe a social media post like this could be somewhat useful to remind you. Listen, these are still the lousy, stinking Gators. And even though as a program you've lapped the field with them over and over and over again, it's still fun to beat up on them. And now Trevor Etienne, wearing the good guys jersey, gets a chance to find out just how true that is tomorrow. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We're happy you're with us, no matter how you get to us. Video 10 a.m., radio app, and Sports Radio 963F, podcast, wherever you find them. Just a lot going on, and we're happy you're here for all of it. And so thankful that our friends from Kroger are with us for all of that, too. And, of course, got done with Halloween yesterday. Now we kind of roll into the real, holiday time of the year. Thanksgiving is around the corner. We have a Thanksgiving coming up here this month. That means you're going to get stocked up for that. You're thinking about Christmas already, but you're also thinking about big tailgate party tomorrow. It is, after all, the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. That means whether you're tailgating in Jacksonville or at home, kind of your own mini cocktail party, getting everything you need to make that a great experience. Obviously, Kroger's helping you with all that. The stuff on the grill, the drinks in the cooler, the plates, the napkins, everything else to make a great game day. Kroger's got you on that. So stop in store and shop as you're already doing or online at Kroger.com. Man, we are so thankful for Kroger's longtime support of us here on DawgNation Daily. Now, speaking of longtime support and longtime stuff, before we're done today, and this is going to be so much fun, our Cody Chafins has put together something that really, I don't know. I mean, I'm a sentimental old fool, I guess, sometimes. Certainly, I got very sentimental and nostalgic, kind of looking back on some of the very early memories in our show. We would kind of bring out some of the Georgia, Florida stuff. A lot of that really, really fun. So we're going to do that before we're done. Also, a lot of great golden shoes here today, kind of getting the right vibe going into Georgia, Florida tomorrow. Jeff Sintel in a moment. A lot of UGA recruiting talk with him. And in addition to that with Jeff, I'm also going to get into some of the big news from yesterday as it relates to Anthony Evans, the wide receiver, not available to Georgia, it doesn't sound like, for Saturday. So we'll talk about his absence, what that means. Big news from the Georgia availability report coming out yesterday. So we will cover a lot of that ground with Jeff here coming up in a moment. Prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse. Presented today by our friends at Zagoria Law. And I want to talk about what I hope could happen for Georgia tomorrow. And I think that there is a game from the recent past between Georgia and Florida that probably gets forgotten a little bit for no other reason than there have been so many meaningful, memorable things that have happened for Georgia over the course of these last few years. A game that played a big role in making Georgia into a championship team, eventually in the memory banks of your mind, or just the laundry list of accomplishments. It keeps kind of getting pushed back down below the fold a bit. But when you go back and look at Georgia beating Florida in 2021, keep in mind now, timeline here. This is prior to the first national championship. This was a time in which a lot of folks kind of wondered, could Georgia truly be a national championship level program? And against Florida that day, Stetson Bennett struggled. But the Georgia defense, which would go on to be historically maybe one of the greatest defenses of all time, certainly probably the greatest Georgia defense of all time, best defense in recent SEC history, and maybe I would certainly say a viable argument to be perhaps the best defense anyone has ever seen. That defense for that stretch near the end of the first half, when it's in a Kobe Dean pick six, it's Nolan Smith doing all kinds of his, sort of heroic things. That defense doing what it did back in 2021, leading to a blowout of Florida. Dan Mullen would get fired shortly after that and would set the stage for Georgia to kind of win that national championship and become the program we now all think of it as. People forget how significant that game against Florida in 2021 was in all of that. And I'll tell you why that's on my mind. It's because of something that I mentioned Joel Klatt a moment ago. Klatt's a guy that I kind of like a little bit. I think I think he knows a lot about football. It certainly comes across that way. I think he's pretty good at kind of giving you a fairly straightforward opinion. He's not my favorite guy in the world necessarily, but I think that Joel Klatt's a decent analyst. And I was listening to him, I mentioned a moment ago, kind of break down the Georgia-Florida game. He has Florida covering in this game, although Georgia winning. But it was something else that Klatt said about kind of where Georgia is as a team right now that in my mind, when you hear this, see if you're with me on this same wavelength. In my mind, it sort of takes me back to where we all were back in 2021. Listen to this and see if you kind of get this same vibe of what's good for Georgia right now, what's concerning for Georgia right now. Does this remind you of the same team that rolled into Jacksonville here just a few years ago? This is Joel Klatt.
I can't wait to see how this Georgia defense plays because they played great against Texas. I think the other interesting part about this is, does Carson Beck start to play better football? Carson Beck has not played very well. Even in the win over Texas, it wasn't because Carson Beck was great. It was because the defense was great and gave him short field after short field after short field in building that 23-0 lead. Beck has thrown 8 picks in his last 4 games, already more than he had all last season. And so you could say it's kind of a Georgia defense deal. And they're going to have to go out there and play well, which they probably should. I think that the one Achilles heel that Georgia has is that they don't have a great passing game. Too many drop passes, even when Beck is on, a lot of drop passes in that wide receiver group, and that leads him to press. And when he presses, he turns the ball over, and that's how you get the 8 picks in the last 4 games.
I mean, to me, that describes a scenario that sort of feels a little bit like 2021. And I'll say this with the Georgia defense, that Joel Klatt says, man, I want to see this defense after what they did against Texas. And I got to tell you, I agree with Joel Klatt on this. This may be the most important storyline for tomorrow's game because what's the one knock that sort of existed on Georgia this year, among many, but one of the knocks is they just haven't been consistent. Like the same team hasn't shown up, in consecutive games necessarily, or even for like 4 quarters within the same game. Georgia's been pretty erratic. They've had stretches where they look like the best team that has ever existed. They have stretches where they don't even seem like the same team. They have just been kind of up and down, game to game, quarter to quarter. There has been a, kind of a lack of consistency, at least if you define consistency by kind of a top-end performance. There's been kind of a lack of consistency with how Georgia's performed here this year. But the last time we saw Georgia on the field at then number 1 Texas, the defense played its best game of the year, reminding you of what the Georgia defense has mostly been about for the last few years here for UGA. Y'all, what if that defense shows up again tomorrow? How big would that be? If you want to use this as a springboard for everything that can happen after it, Georgia's defense playing against Florida the same way that it played against Texas, keeping DJ Lagway at bay, eliminating Florida, who has had a little bit of a penchant for explosive plays, keeping that and corralled and under control. If the Georgia defense shows up 2 games in a row, then maybe that is becoming more a part of the identity of this team. And that would be very bad news for anybody else Georgia has to play the rest of the way. So watching the Georgia defense and watching what it can do tomorrow, if it looks like the Georgia defense again, then not only would it be great to celebrate a win against a hated rival, it'd be really exciting to think about the playing personality that's evolving for Georgia at perhaps exactly the right time. But in addition to that, I mentioned before that when Georgia went to Jacksonville in 2021 and got the big plays from Kobe Dean, got the big plays from Nolan Smith there at the end of the first half, dominating Florida in a fast flurry there at the end of the half that turned into a blowout there that day. It was a stark reminder of just how good this Georgia defense could be. And it was important in that particular game because it was the Georgia offense struggling. Stetson Bennett was not yet the historic figure he would become, and a lot of folks were asking a lot of tough questions about him there at that time. And if we're being honest here, what was being said about Bennett then sounds a little bit like what guys like Joel Klatt are saying about Carson Beck now. Not just Beck. Some of this is receivers dropping the ball too. But you just heard Klatt say it. Georgia right now does not have a strong passing attack. The weird thing about that is they're throwing it more often than they're running it by a pretty wide margin, but the passing attack right now is just not stellar for UGA. There is criticism, there is skepticism about that aspect of the Georgia program. Carson Beck throwing too many interceptions, passing attack nowhere near efficient enough, whether you blame that on Beck or blame that on some of the guys who are supposed to be catching him. This is a Georgia offense through the air that has a lot of curiosity around it right now and a lot of, frank, just disbelief. People are not quite so sure that unit can do it. The same way people had those doubts perhaps way back in 2021. But do you remember what happened after that game? After the big flurry defensively led by Nolan Smith and contributed by Nakobe Dean? Do you remember the way that Nolan Smith stepped up and spoke on behalf of his team at the end of that game? Wouldn't it be great if we saw a come-together moment for Georgia, a uniting of Georgia, a connection with the Georgia players on Saturday that was reminiscent of what Nolan Smith led for this team in 2021? Let me give you a reminder from Nolan way back then.
I want to say something about my quarterback now, Stetson Bennett, the mailman. Y'all call him a weak point. I read all the stuff on media. I know I'm not supposed to, but one thing about Stetson, he just works. He don't listen to nobody. He just works. He a blue-collar guy. And when you talk about trusting the guy, I trust him because he go out there and work and put his best foot forward every day, even though it may not look pretty to y'all, but he's getting the job done. And I trust our whole offensive group. I love all those guys. I always cheer them on, even when they doing bad, even when they scoring, I tell them keep their head up. I go talk to the whole offensive line because I tell them every day before every game, the game up front.
So first of all, it's hard to believe that even back in 2021, we were still doing like the Zoom press conference after the game. What a strange time that was in our world. But the point is, how good is that from Nolan Smith in 2021? Like, I could talk for hours about that. I don't have time to do that, but I could. There is so much to be unearthed from that you would like to just bottle that up and like give that to this 2024 team here right now. Nolan used the word trust several times. Like, wouldn't you love to believe this 2024 team trusts each other? The guys on this team trust each other as much as that 2021 team did. That this team this season could have the same level of bond that team had. Wouldn't you love to believe that's true? And that, in praising Stetson Bennett and in defending Stetson Bennett at a time in which Bennett was not playing well, Nolan Smith says, this is my guy. It's almost like the old T.O. line about this is my quarterback. He says he's a blue-collar guy. Like, wouldn't you love for Carson Beck to have that same level of support from his teammates here right now and be the sort of blue-collar guy that can be down in the trenches with him? Wouldn't you love for that to be true about Georgia? Perhaps it is, and perhaps we'll see it on display on Saturday. I would also say, wouldn't you love for a Georgia player to be able to step up and speak so forcefully as a leader the way that Nolan Smith did then? Perhaps Georgia has that guy. There are certainly candidates to be that guy. But wouldn't Saturday, post-game, and kind of however you spin this forward going from there, to hear somebody step up and speak that way, wouldn't that be a great thing? It's hard to ask, this team to be that team because every team kind of has its own unique personality. But that was the best of Georgia right there. Dominating defensively, coming together, supporting an offense that was struggling, and the offense then building off that confidence, started playing better the rest of the way, and ultimately the offense became part of the reason that Georgia won that national championship and a huge reason why it won the next national championship. That's what connection is all about. I don't think we yet know how connected this Georgia team is, but Jacksonville in the past has been a place where the Georgia Bulldogs have found connection before. That clip from Nolan Smith, perfect example of that. And Saturday would be a great opportunity for them to find it all over again. And that is Around the Doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at Zagoria Law. Now, listen, I love what Zagoria Law does for folks like you in our audience because I feel like that the law is such a complicated topic. And there's so many different facets of the law. People obviously specialize in different elements of the law. But even within kind of what you might sort of think of as the personal injury space, there's a way to kind of specialize that even more. And that's what Zagoria Law has done. They're saying, hey, we're looking at a unique kind of category of legal situations here. People who've been bitten by a dog, people who've been knocked over by a dog. If a big dog knocks you over, you break your arm. Obviously, there's a cost to you around that. That's what Zagoria Law is about. They're the official dog bite lawyers of the Georgia Bulldogs. They literally have written the book about how to win cases when it comes to like dog bite injuries and things like that. They're very, very serious about that and very, very dedicated to that kind of thing. So if you or somebody you love has had some sort of interaction where maybe an owner of a dog didn't take proper care of that dog, allowed it to get loose, or just wasn't, behaving the way they should have been, acting in a negligent way, well, of course, you deserve your chance at compensation on that situation, just like anybody would in any personal injury situation. That's why you want to trust our friends at Zagoria Law to help you get that. I want you to give them a call, 833-GA-DOG-BITE. That's 833-GA-DOG-BITE. You can also find them online, ZagoriaLaw.com. That's Z-A-G-O-R-I-A, ZagoriaLaw.com. They're the only law firm in Georgia that specializes in representing by people who've been injured by dogs or bitten by dogs. So if you or someone you love has been bitten by a dog that wasn't yours, perhaps the owner not doing everything they could to keep the folks around them safe, well, let's talk about how we get you properly compensated for that. Let's talk to our friends at Zagoria Law. One more time, 833-GA-DOG-BITE. That's D-O-G, 833-GA-DOG-BITE. Also online at ZagoriaLaw.com. Okay, so before we're done today, one of the biggest names in college football is apparently backtracking in a very big way on a very bold claim he made just before the season began. I'll tell you what this has to do with the Georgia Bulldogs here before we're done. Also, a great look at our history of being Gator haters around here. That's going to be a lot of fun, too. But for now, key Georgia injury and a lot of recruiting talk. Let's bring on Jeff Sintel here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Glad to have Jeff Sintel here, getting ready for the cocktail party. Jeff already kind of heading that way. Obviously, he'll get a chance tonight to also, I believe, see Elias Williams in Camden County. That's a lot of fun as the action there in Region 1 gets really, really intriguing and interesting. So that's good stuff. Wintersville Classic tonight there, too, between Valdosta and Lowndes. That'll be a lot of fun for observers of high school football in Georgia. And, Jeff, there's a lot of recruiting stuff I want to talk to you about. I do want to bring you in on, though, one story I haven't had a chance to get to yet, kind of away from the recruiting world. That is the latest availability report from Georgia now lists Anthony Evans as out for Saturday's game. Big deal for the wide receiving corps, perhaps. Certainly a big deal to lose your punt returner here in this spot. What do you make of Evans and what appears to be, at least based on the Thursday at night availability report, his absence for Georgia on Saturday?
Yeah, Brandon, that's kind of an interesting one. The first place my mind goes, my friend, is I think about who's going to be the punt returner now, because is that a moment now for Sokovie White, a true freshman, in the Georgia-Florida game of all places, when Georgia is kind of already going to lean on a freshman starter in KJ Bolden going down to the cocktail party. That's interesting. I mean, Brandon, I think Evans, in terms of the passing game, is probably a little bit down the depth chart, but you see this video right here, this great CC Chafin's Ace video right here. You see the rep right here, right? This could not be any more perfect. You got Anthony Evans taking a punt, and who's the guy right behind him taking the next one in pregame warmups? That's Sokovie White, and live in living color there on DawgNation Daily.
Well, listen, I certainly like Sokovie White a lot. I believe he's got a very bright future at Georgia. And if you're looking for a guy that you can try, I mean, frankly, in a game like this, what it comes down to is it's not that you're trying to take a touchdown back to the house, although you'd certainly love to do that. You just want to drop one, right? You want to make sure you want to make sure you catch everything soundly. You want to make sure you don't give Florida the free possession. And if it is Sokovie in place of Evans, if the remainder of the availability reports do kind of keep Evans out, and it is Sokovie in his spot, then I believe that's a guy that I would trust to make those catches and make sure that you preserve those opportunities for Georgia possessions. That's a guy that I would trust if he's kind of called into that duty.
You know, it's funny, Brandon. The things we hear over the summer and in the fall is that there were stretches where White was probably more reliable in simply doing just that, man. That's catching the ball. Of course, Anthony Evans has the world-class speed. I would argue that Sokovi has pretty incredible speed of his own in that 4.5 realm, but he's got great twitch, pretty incredible twitch as well. So that's one of those things, Brandon. I must admit, I got a little happy watching you play back some Nolan and some, I guess, greatest hits, DawgNation, with the Zoom interviews. But the one thing I'll say is it was so great to see Nolan and what he represented. I don't think we may have players as talented as Nolan, but as far as the teammate, heartbeat type stuff goes with Nolan, that's amazing. And it is this, Brandon, and I've known this for a while, even when I was a wee pup, when I was in school at UGA. A lot of Georgia coaches, a lot of old timers would always tell me this one phrase, and I want to make sure I circulate it all the time. You really don't know what type of Georgia football team you have until you go to Jacksonville. And that is always true, no matter how good this program is, no matter how highly it's ranked. You really don't know how good the football team is until it comes out of Jacksonville.
No, I think that's exactly right. And, listen, maybe it's asking too much because, look, special teams are special for a reason. If they're all the same, then nobody's special, right? So the 2021 team, I think, was clearly special. But it would be nice if something happens tomorrow, whether it's the defense playing well for a second day, a little bit of a second straight game, a little bit of a rallying around Carson, a performance by Carson that creates the opportunity to rally around it. I'd love to get some remnants from what happened for this team in 2021 from this game tomorrow. That might be the emotional lift to take Georgia through what's going to be a really challenging November. That is just the case. Very, very challenging November here coming up. I'd love to see something happen tomorrow, whether it's post-game comments, leaders stepping up, somebody having an outstanding individual game. I'd love to have something happen tomorrow that does kind of call back to what this team did in this game as recently as 2021.
Yeah, Brandon, I think you're right there. I think the one thing that everybody would want to see is just a dog leave that game with kind of guns blazing or some juice. And it could be a big Carson day. And if Carson gets active, then that means maybe a Lawson Lucky has a great day, or a Dylan Bell has a great day, or a Dominic Lovett. Seems like he's overdue for a performance. And of course, the natural choice there is obviously Trevor Etienne in the backfield. He's got another homecoming as well. But Brandon, I'd look to what we've seen so far, and that's the defense. I think we finally saw the most complete version of the Georgia defense against Texas. And you saw Jalen Walker. Man, Brandon, if Jalen Walker just gets kind of close to what he did against Texas, he not only will be a player of the game, he'll also be moving into that All-American Butkus type category. And that's very impressive to think about there with Jalen. And then you also got Michael. Maybe Michael is the one that gets the high number of sacks. And I'm also, you mentioned the availability report, Brandon. I don't know how much is going to be made of this, because I think Tate Ratledge back, at least getting in the rotation, is major. Because remember all this PFF list? And listen, a lot of people don't buy stock and trade and live and breathe on those things, but Tate Ratledge was the number one returning guard in the country. And whether that eval is spot on or whether they don't even give Tate enough justice, Brandon, he is a senior leader. He's been in this program for 5 years. He is a mauler and a masher in the run game, and he cares about Georgia. He cares about this program. And I think Tate back is another biggie.
Yeah, it could be very interesting to watch. And I mentioned you being down in South Georgia tonight, kind of other side of the state, but still South Georgia. There's a name I think of note for Georgia fans here right now. Jeremiah McLeod is a Florida defensive line commit, but there is some chatter about him in Georgia here right now. And listen, just for good vibes, if nothing else, talk about the possibility of Georgia flipping a player away from Florida. Feels like the good thing to do before a cocktail party game on Saturday. We've seen Georgia already win with Lee County here this year, as Usmani Cromack made his commitment to Georgia not too long ago. Is there a chance that Georgia could be in business for McLeod here too?
Definitely. Brandon, hopefully I'm not telling tales too early or too out of school, but I think Georgia has been in maybe the A1A pole position for Jeremiah McLeod since Tennessee Tech. And that's the same visit that he took with Ousmane Kroma, which kind of sealed the deal for Ousmane Kroma, excuse me, pardon me on that one. But I think Jeremiah McLeod has been thinking long and hard about being a Dog since that point. And I think Georgia is very, very much in play there for the flip potential with Jeremiah McLeod.
And then obviously fun to watch that. And then you also had a couple good stories here at Dog Nation this week related to a couple of Georgia wide receiver commits. Landon Roldan continues to have a really great year on both sides of the ball for North Oconee, although wide receiver at Georgia, Talon Taylor, gets a big bump in his recruiting ranking, and you had a good story with him. Terrence Edwards weighing in on that. Jeff, in our comment section even right now, the receiver position continues to be a hot topic. How do guys like Talon Taylor and Landon Roldan a little bit of a different recruiting profile, but how do guys like this potentially bolster a position group for Georgia? They could probably use a bit of a boost.
Well, with Talon, I thought it was monumental, Brandon. I had to make sure I wrote a story about it because it was kind of one of those bird in the hand type things, I guess, a little bit. Talon, when he committed to Georgia, kind of a lifelong, or at least, adolescent, high school age Georgia fan. He went into high school as a Dog fan outside of Chicago. And when he committed to Georgia back on June 11th, I'll always remember that because that's my wife's birthday. But when he committed to Georgia on June 11th, he was only number 71 in the country. And we said, just wait, just watch him get film, because he exploded on the 7-on-7 circuit. And slowly but surely, Brendan, I think catching 17 touchdowns from your first 34 catches of a senior year will do that. But he became a 5-star. His rankings with all the composites, the ESPN, the Rivals, the On3, the 24/7, he moved him up to the number 7 wide receiver in the country, number 29 overall. We know what a 5-star means. That's a projected first-round pick. Brandon, you know the last one. I don't need to tell you, but I want to make sure the good people on your air and on your show know. Last one of those was George Pickens back in 2019. And Brandon, I think somehow, some way over the weekend when Taylor got his 5th star, I bet you involuntarily had a chortle like you did for Pickens way back when, because you're like, man, where'd that come from? And then now you know that Taylor got his 5th star. And Brandon, I loved what Terrence Edwards had to say. I mean, this guy owns A1A of all the Georgia receiving records: career yards, single season yards, career touchdowns, career catches. I said, what do you think of this Talon Taylor kid? And the first thing he said when he started watching his senior film was, he's like, oh, wow. He went on to compare him to an Ohio State receiver, Brandon. That would be Garrett Wilson, the guy that just made the sick catch last night on Thursday Night Football. One-handed, it looked brilliant. And when Georgia not only takes a wide receiver away that Ohio State wanted, because that was the case here with Talon Taylor, but he's drawing comparisons from the GOAT TE, Terrence Edwards, to a first-rounder at Ohio State. Brandon, I don't have to tell you, we have not used to hearing that sort of rarefied air for Georgia's wide receiver incoming imported talent. And then with Landon Roldan, I just went to Pollock, because David Pollock, great friend of the show, great friend of Dog Nation, he's been watching Landon Roldan all his life. And he said he took the, like true David Pollock form, he took it head on, the whole Ladd McConkey stuff. He said, all right, hold on a second. He said, Ladd's probably quicker and twitchier, but he said Landon's faster. Landon probably has better hands, and he has elite ball skills. He called Landon Roldan's ball skills an elite superhero trait. Brandon, that's a new one on our pages of DawgNation.com.
Yeah.
To hear a great football, an SEC legend, former first rounder, ESPN personality, guy that's seen a lot of ball, and David Pollock say that Landon Roldan has an elite superhero trait, and it is his ball skills, Brandon. I would argue he's got another elite superhero trait, and that's his 4.37 speed on the laser in the 40. So you want to get a more dynamite out wide. You want to get more playmakers out wide, more guys that can help Georgia quarterbacks of the future, whether it's Ryan Puglisi or Gunnar Stockton or whatever the cards may fall. You got to be excited about the wide receiver group right now in the 2025 recruiting class.
Yeah, you certainly probably should. And I think that there's a lot to like about Roldan, as you've kind of, done a good job of describing there. I think in the case of Talon Taylor, and I'm just being honest, I'm certainly not trying to be, negative here, but I think that one of the reasons why you don't see a more universal I guess, rallying of Georgia fans around Taylor as sort of the next big thing at UGA is just that, I guess, hesitancy of, well, if he's this good of a receiver, then will we see what has happened with other good receivers that Georgia's been in the mix for, that someone is going to come in and make an NIL offer that Georgia chooses not to match. And once again, I'm not trying to be overly negative here because we're in a great mood. It's a Friday before the cocktail party. But in a normal situation, a Georgia receiver commit getting a 5th star from one of the recruiting services would have been treated as very big news. In this particular case, I think Georgia fans are a little bit wait and see of, well, if he's this good of a recruit and if he's getting this kind of attention, then obviously other programs, bagmen are going to be paying more attention to this too, and there's going to be skepticism there. What say you about that?
Yeah, Brandon, I guess I'd have a little bit of pushback on this because I think it's a little different. Not only is it the way Taylor has grown up a Georgia fan, the way I've spoken to him, I've spoken to his mother several times now, and like, this is just a family. His mother's a softball coach. She wants that development. She wants the elite kind of proving ground in Athens where there's first-round corners and first-round safeties that he'll have to kind of develop around. She likes that culture. She likes the Georgia coaches. And Brandon, probably this is, I'm kind of laughing, but it's pretty much true, is this is probably the best way Georgia could ever acquire 5 stars. Already have one committed and in the fold and loving being a dog, and then get the 5th star later, because the big problem is Georgia went after those guys that were already top 3, top 4, top 5 in the country that had the 5 stars. And I'll use one of your favorite terms, kind of got money whipped. They weren't going to win that race. And with Taylor, the money, the bidding war, the high stakes, Brandon, he shut all that down after his first official visit to Georgia. Didn't go see Notre Dame, didn't go see Ohio State. When Ohio State, they gave him the offer, he was a take, and he basically, Brandon, pretty much shut it down. And that's kind of the culture right now. I mean, he hears from other schools, but he's saying, I'm a dog, and they're not going very far. He's not taking those visits. And as good as we can feel about some sort of risk management insurance or some risk factor involved here with having a 5-star commitment in the fold, I think DawgNation and Georgia fans can feel pretty good about Talon Taylor right now.
Well, we'll watch that and see how it plays out. I've got another guy I want to ask you about. I also want to remind you, folks who are watching us right now, I mentioned Jeff tonight seeing a really good game. We've got a great game on the Peachtree Sports Network as Prince Avenue Christian takes on Hebron Christian Academy. Great battle of 2 very, very strong programs in that kind of private classification of Georgia. This is for a region title ahead of that unique state playoff that they'll be a part of here coming up in a couple of weeks. And, of course, next week is kind of that kind of catch-up date after what has been a very weird year for Georgia high school football ahead of the start of the state playoffs. And so next week, the Peachtree Sports Network, which I'm very proud to be a part of, is going to have a great bracket preview. It's the Score Atlanta High School Football Bracket Show. It's from 8 until 11 p.m. next Friday night. Going to take 3 hours to get up to date on all the brackets in Georgia high school football on kind of that sort of catch-up week for some teams before we move into the start of the postseason the following week. Score Atlanta staff, you'll have Craig Sayer Jr. and Najee Wilkins going to be a part of that. Rusty Manziel, no doubt, a part of that there too. All kinds of fun and surprise on that. Seedings determined live on air, putting the brackets in there, kind of getting ready for a great, great run through the Georgia high school football state playoffs. I'm being told that a lot of Georgia high school football savants are going to be on. So I don't know that I count as a savant, but maybe I'll make an appearance there too. We'll have coaches on the air live. That's going to be a lot of fun. It'll be on the Peachtree Sports Network next Friday from 8 to 11 p.m. Also streamed on the Atlanta News First app, YouTube TV, Zeem, and the NFHS Network. That's going to be a lot of fun. Hope to see you there for that. And by the way, speaking of the Peachtree Sports Network, one of my great colleagues that'll be on TV with tonight, our Kaylee Manziel, be hosting the DawgNation Game Day preview show tomorrow from Jacksonville starting at 1:30 p.m. And, of course, Jeff Sintel will be a part of that, too. Do you have all of that down? A lot coming up here over the course of the next couple of weeks. We're excited about all of it. Jeff, something else I'm excited about to wrap up our conversation with you here today. Once again, another school that's been good to Georgia already this year, the Demons of Warner Robins. Isaiah Gibson, terrific edge rusher, defensive line type, already coming to Georgia. One of his teammates, 4-star safety, Rashawn Deakins, currently committed to Georgia Tech. but it certainly seems like Georgia's making quite a push here. I love these guys from Central Georgia. I love the Warner Robins program in particular. A lot to like about Dinkins, is there not?
Lot to like, Brandon. I mean, I don't mind feeling. I'm not going to try and lose my recruiting analyst card here. I don't think it's risky by saying this is a Javon Bullard type player, Brandon. He was All-State as a junior. That followed a year where he had 8 picks as a sophomore. He's a 4-year starter. The defensive coordinator at Warner Robins, LeBrandon Hudson, I've known him for many, many years. He tells me that Rayshawn is good enough to coach the position. He lets him make calls in the middle of the game, Brandon. He lines up linebackers. He lines up the corners. He sets coverage, and he can decide whether to apply pressure or to apply coverage to certain areas of the field. It's kind of, you don't really see a lot of those keys to the kingdom being given to a player like Rayshawn. And Brendan, he's also amazing on the offensive side of the ball. I think he's got like 700 yards receiving, something like that, 7 touchdown catches. He ran for 700 yards a year ago as a running back for Warner Robins, and played high-level ball. And Georgia kept looking, and they were like, is he really prototype? Maybe not. He's only like 5'11 and a half and 185. And, Georgia likes to find those first-round types that are 6'2 to play safety. But he just kept stacking up so much dadgum good film, man. That's the only way I can say it, with a little bit of middle Georgia in my mouth. And man, he's a player that's currently committed to Tech, but his good friend, his childhood friend, Isaiah Gibson, is committed to Georgia. And he's told me many a times that he's going to recruit Rayshawn for the flip as hard as he possibly can. And Brandon, this is a player, I'm going to tell you how good he is. Isaiah Gibson is the #1 edge in the country, and he's a 5-star. And I bet if I asked 100 Warner Robins fans that watch that program week in and week out, they bleed with that program, I bet a bunch of them might say that maybe the most effective player on the team, most valuable player on the team, pound for pound, might even be Rayshawn Dinkins, because he does so much. Now, obviously, Isaiah has the first-round skill, which is the size and the pass rush and the havoc rate. But you're talking about a very, very good player, Brendan, and I don't mind making the comparison there to Javon Bullard, and that's probably all I need to say for DawgNation. But you look at the resume for him as well, Brandon, and he's got a lot of Caleb Downs type stat line stuff all over it, making plays all over the field, committed to Tech. Now, Rayshawn has told me, had some very interesting quotes in the story this week. I'd encourage folks to go look at it, but he's told me he wants to take an official to Georgia, wants to see what Georgia is all about there before he makes any moves. But that's the one I'd watch, DawgNation, as far as Flipmas season. That's the one the Dogs really want to bring in the fold.
So do I have this right? You're going to go see Elias Williams tonight?
Yeah, I'm going to see them. They're playing in Kingsland, Camden County. Elias Williams had a great senior year, kind of got out of the wing tee offense. He's going to go I think he's got 11 touchdown catches so far this year. Brandon, let me tell you what I'm hearing. A lot of the coaches that have seen him, they think maybe early on at Georgia until he gets a little bit more weight, because he's already 6'7", 240, but they think he can play the X receiver and play it pretty stinking well as well. And Georgia doesn't have a whole lot of them on the field right now, but you're talking about the #1 tight end in the country, who is a 3-time All-State basketball player, has been a matchup nightmare so far. And I had one really smart South Georgia coach tell me that if you can get Elias Williams to sink his hips and to break off and run a really good curl route with what he can do down the field and stretching it vertically, you've got the prototype there for a first-round receiver as well. Think of that, Brandon. I think we spent some valuable airtime, good airtime, talking about Landon Roldan, talking about Talon Taylor, but really Georgia might add 2 5-star wide receiver types in this class and not just one when we're talking about Elias Williams and Talon Taylor.
Well, I do truly believe that from an athletic standpoint, combination of size and speed, Williams is as good an athlete as they've signed. I mean, I don't know how far back you have to go. I mean, this is a really, really special athlete. I think, as you mentioned, a little bit different kind of offense for him the last couple of years, now getting a chance to probably showcase a little bit more of his playmaking ability. I think this is a really special athlete and the kind of guy that I just think the Georgia fans are going to love him. And obviously putting it together at the college level is a different kind of thing and a big ask, but in terms of how he's going to look in a uniform and the kinds of guys he's going to remind you of, this is a big-time athlete for sure. So looking forward to more of your profile of him, getting a chance to see him tonight. And I'll look forward to seeing you there for the cocktail party tomorrow. Obviously, a big part of our game day pregame coverage as well. So thanks for that, Jeff. And back here again on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, again very soon as well.
Hey, man, get to Duval safe. Can't wait to see you down there on the banks of the St. John's. Love it, man. See you later, man.
See you. Good stuff.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, we got a good one tonight. Hebron Christian, Prince Avenue Christian, a lot of fun. A lot of last names you recognize playing for Prince Avenue. Hebron's also loaded with major college prospects, a lot of good defensive linemen, and this is going to be a really, really good game tonight. Two of the sort of smaller classification private schools, but in terms of like the major college prospects in one game, I'd say they're going to be doing just about as well as anybody is. Really fun one tonight on the Peachtree Sports Network between Hebron Christian, Prince Avenue Christian. That's going to decide a region championship. And then both those teams will move on to what is one of the wildest kind of tournaments we've had in terms of the sort of 3A and below private school classification using the power rankings. And it's just it's a very interesting scenario. Let me just sort of say it that way. Going to be good tonight on the Peachtree Sports Network. And, of course, great for Jeff. The page is thedawgnation.com, looking in on Elias Williams there, too. Now, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Let me tell you, it is a great time to be thinking about a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. And when I'm searching for a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, first of all, I'm reaching out to Jessica Slater right away, because there's obviously all kinds of ways to like sort of search this for yourself. But one of the things you do when you're like looking for the ship you want to sail on, the port that you want to sail out of, the destinations you want to visit, a lot of that gets really complicated really fast. That's just kind of the way that goes. That's one of the reasons why Royal Caribbean, even though it doesn't cost you anything, they encourage you to use a great travel agent to book your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. They're willing to pay that travel agent to provide you a great service, make sure you get the Royal Caribbean cruise vacation that you really want. So that way you're choosing the right one to be on, the one that fits the needs for you and your family and those that you're traveling with. And for me, when I'm doing that search for a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, it always starts with, okay, well, which ship's going to Perfect Day CocoCay? That's the kind of the first thing that I'm looking at, and I sort of build from that. But you may have your own desires, your own wishes, the ports that you want to see it visit, or special things on board a Royal Caribbean cruise ship that you want to enjoy. Which one has the most water slides, for instance? You may be asking questions like that. Jessica can answer all that for you. So give her a call. 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She'll get you going on a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation as we head towards the end of 2024, early 2025. She's got you on all of that. All right, let's go cruise around the SEC here for a moment. And to start, I'm going to step outside the SEC. But maybe I'm more prone to this than some people are. Like, little things get me fired up sometimes. This is a very small thing, but it just crawled all over me. And let me see if I can describe this the right way to see if I can get you as mad as I was. Do y'all remember, and we did this show, obviously, all, spring and summer long. We heard a ton of this. Do you remember all the hype that Ohio State got before the year began? We were told that this was the best team money could buy. And do you remember Urban Meyer in particular, the former Ohio State coach? Urban Meyer in particular said before the year began that he thought that Ohio State was perhaps the best roster in college football in at least the last 10 years. Do you remember him saying that? Do you remember Urban Meyer saying that at least the best, roster in the last 10 years for college football, like falling all over himself, praising Ohio State? We had to endure that and listen to that nonsense. Well, the fact of the matter is, at really no point in time this year has Ohio State looked like that type of team. They've already lost to Oregon. They were in danger of losing to Nebraska. This has not been the all-time great team as of yet. $20 million roster, not been that as of yet, to the point now where even apparently Urban Meyer is considering backtracking. Ohio State plays another big game on Saturday, having to go to Penn State. They are about a 3.5-point favorite. Do you know that Urban Meyer, former Buckeyes coach, who before the season began told us this was the best team in a decade in college football, all of a sudden now this coward doesn't have the guts to pick them to win at Penn State? He's like, I'll take, Penn State plus the points. Maybe Ohio State wins, but I think it's going to be inside of a field goal. The spread's only 3.5, and he's trying to use that as a hedge not to pick the winner of the game. Is he really backtracking this much after he made a fool of himself, talking about Ohio State being this historically good team before the season began? All of a sudden now he's going the other way to say, I'm not even sure they can beat Penn State. Like this Penn State team who's never beaten anybody of note ever, this is the team that you're afraid of with your vaunted Buckeyes? Drives me crazy. I mean, a lot of these guys just go on these TV shows or these podcasts. They just say whatever, and they don't expect any accountability for the things that they say. I mean, listen, I say a lot of dumb stuff all the time, but hopefully our through line narrative-wise is consistent. The dumb stuff I say, at least I'll stand behind it a month later because, there's going to be plenty of times when I have to. Hopefully I'll still own it. In this particular case, Meyer throws out this like ludicrously hot take of best team in a decade. Here we are, not even, hardly halfway through the season, and he's already hedging on whether or not they can even beat Penn State on the road. Look, the fact of the matter is that there are some games in college football that I think are easy to pick. I mean, they just are. Now, famously, obviously, college football is notoriously difficult to predict. As I sometimes say, games are easy to project, not easy to predict. You can find the point spread, but deciding which side of the point spread you're going to be on, that's where things get tricky. But they're not all that way. And for me on Saturday, perhaps famous last words, but nonetheless, for me on Saturday, this Ohio State-Penn State game is easy to predict because Penn State never has, under James Franklin, I don't believe ever will, win a game of note. These are just simply not the kinds of games that Penn State wins. They're just not. Ohio State's got some injuries here too. Offensive line, obviously a big concern already, and now they've got injuries to the offensive line, including their star offensive tackle. Perhaps that complicates it somewhat, but not enough for me to change my mind on the game. Penn State's just not capable of winning games like this. And, they're ranked in the top 5, things like that, but this is what the Big Ten has. They have these inflated records and these inflated rankings for teams with these gaudy records, these pretty, records 0 in the loss column. But anytime they're put to the test, oftentimes they are just left lacking. I mean, frankly, Ohio State's that team a bunch. But it compares to a Penn State, this is the one, air quotes around big game, this is the one big game we believe they can win because Penn State never wins a big game. They never win a big game. They can be playing at home. They can get Drew Aller back to quarterback. I believe he is coming back for this game, or Allar, I guess that's how you say it, Drew Allar. They can get him coming back. Doesn't matter. Penn State is incapable of winning games like this. So 3.5, 10.5. Make the spread whatever you want. Penn State's not winning this game. And the fact that Urban Meyer, after saying all he said before the year began, doesn't have the guts to even pick Ohio State in this particular spot, boy, that tells me a lot about Meyer. And perhaps it tells me a lot about the phoniness of Ohio State. Is this some all-time great team? How about you beat Penn State? How about you not struggle with Nebraska? What a mess the Big Ten is right now, other than perhaps Oregon, who seems to be figuring it out here at the exact right time. Now, in the SEC, the league we probably like better and certainly care more about, you've got a couple of teams trying to avoid upset on Saturday. And I told you yesterday, for me, Texas A&M, Mike Elko deserves a lot of credit. And what they did last week with Marcel Reed coming in at quarterback was certainly interesting. But at a certain point, I think you just sort of reach your ceiling for what you're capable of doing in consecutive weeks. And the Aggies have been on quite a run here lately. I am always going to be of the belief that those kinds of strings just come to an end. And asking a team to do it, for instance, 3 weeks in a row, get the emotional win against LSU, now go on the road to South Carolina. Gamecocks, look, they struggle offensively. They really do. But this is an outstanding defense. And, Marcel Reed, for all he can do with his legs, is not a very good thrower. So if you really are abandoning Wegman for Reed, then you are going to be limited in the passing game because of that. And the one elite trait that Reed has, his ability to make guys miss with his legs, honestly, it's not quite as easy to do that against the South Carolina defensive front that's playing about as well as anybody is in this SEC here right now. So I would definitely put A&M on major upset alert tomorrow. I think that the prevailing narrative of the week, the idea that they're sort of roller skating their way to an undefeated conference record ahead of the Texas game at the end of the regular season, that's just way too much too soon for me. Way too much too soon. I would definitely give an extra look to South Carolina here in this spot. plus the 2.5. My official pick is South Carolina. I'm going to make that as a part of Go With the Flow later on today on the Dog Nation video channels. It's not a stand against Texas A&M. I think that's probably a pretty good football team. It's simply the belief that only the very best teams in America play really well, like 3 weeks in a row, and A&M's not quite in that category. That's going to be our pushback there. I'll also ask you to watch Ole Miss going to Arkansas. They're a 7.5-point favorite against the Hogs. Sam Pittman has had plenty of success against Lane Kiffin in the past. Ole Miss playoff hopes hanging by a string with Georgia coming next Saturday. I think this is also probably worth watching, too. I'd be very surprised if Ole Miss loses it, but the Rebels, frankly, haven't played offense well enough to really make you think that they're going to be easily winning a game like this. I mean, listen, Arkansas, I think, has been one of the real pleasant surprises in the SEC. Sam Pittman began the year as the coach, along with Billy Napier, perhaps the most likely to get fired. Now, eventually, maybe that still happens. Pittman may be ready to step away in Fayetteville. But honestly, if I had to give a Coach of the Year vote in the SEC right now, I mean, Mike Elko probably wins it. But if you had to give a ranking and a list of coaches who've really exceeded expectations this year, I think that Pittman would have to be on that list. He is once again doing a very good job there with his beloved home state team, the Arkansas Razorbacks. And I believe they keep it closer than experts think against Ole Miss on Saturday, too. I'll also finish with this. Have y'all seen that Auburn is like a touchdown favorite? I think 6.5 points at last check against Vanderbilt on Saturday. Where is that coming from? And listen, I realize this is famous last words. I totally get it. That one of the oldest adages, and we believe pretty, consistently in this, if a line seems fishy, then somebody knows something you don't know. Don't trust your own knowledge. It's oftentimes better to trust the knowledge of people who know more than you do. And in this particular case, we're not going to do that because I have just seen Vanderbilt be a better team than Auburn all year long. I really have. I mean, after all of the talk of Texas going to Vanderbilt, Vandy still almost won that game last Saturday. They at least kept it close. They've beaten Alabama. Of course, they lost to Georgia State. You can't forget that. But, I mean, on a per-week basis, Vanderbilt's just been a better football team. And yes, they have to go to Jordan-Hare Stadium. But under Hugh Freeze, that has not been a real dangerous spot for opponents, including Diego Pavia, the quarterback for Vanderbilt, who won here a year ago as the quarterback for New Mexico State. I don't see how you get to Auburn as a touchdown favorite here in this game. So you could maybe mark that and save this as famous last words, but I am all over Vandy against Auburn on Saturday. I just don't see how you couldn't be. Just don't see how you couldn't be. And we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Before we have some fun here and do something really cool with kind of a look back on some great Gator hater moments for us in the past, let me also give a shout out to our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips. We did our Dog Nation Invasion events here this year. Atlanta Sports Trips helped power those for us. Great partner for us in all of that. And as you kind of move through the rest of the season here, football-wise, including thinking about next weekend, you've got some great stuff going down with Atlanta Sports Trips and the Atlanta Falcons. They travel to New Orleans, take on the New Orleans Saints. You can get tickets and hospitality package to see the Falcons against the Saints there in New Orleans, including a 3-night stay at the New Orleans Marriott. You get a Saturday night football party on Bourbon Street featuring the former Falcon Jesse Tuckle, who, by the way, went into our Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame last week. You get an all-inclusive tailgate party on the day of the big game. Matt Chernoff from 680 The Fan, he's going to be there. You can also get tickets to the Falcons-Saints game there on November 10th. So for more on this, make sure you check out atlsportstrips.com. That is atlsportstrips.com. So make sure you check that out and enjoy all of that. And of course, ready-to-drink cocktails, a big part of the fun there anytime you're in New Orleans. And speaking of a ready-to-drink cocktail, we also love that when it comes to our friends at the Finish Long Drink. And every Friday on our show, they present what we like to call our Long Finish, a great way to wrap up what has been a fun week. Obviously, especially fun when you're kind of rolling into a cocktail party, as we will be doing on Saturday. And as has been our tradition on game weeks here this year, the outstanding work of Cody Chaffins, putting together a little bit of a video look at the upcoming game. And this particular week, boy, I was honored. Cody did this and then sort of shared it with me as a surprise. All of the Gator hater stuff we've done for such a long time, how much fun is to go back and kind of reminisce on some of this kind of stuff. I tell you, it's a blast from the past for me, a great look back on some really happy moments for me here on this show, and perhaps a great way to sort of set the right vibe going into Saturday's game. Here is Cody Chaffins, his great work on video, as a part of our long finish here presented by the Finish Long Drink. The Georgia Bulldogs have gotten another win against those lousy, stinking Gators. This is what it's all about here right now. It's great to be a Gator hater.
We believe a good Georgia fan is a Gator hater first and foremost.
This is my brand new buddy. It is Eddie. Eddie is my blind squirrel. Dan Mullen the other day talked about Georgia winning the SEC, saying 1 year doesn't really prove anything, that even a blind squirrel can find a nut. Can we kind of celebrate the silliness of Marco Wilson throwing a shoe? On my desk every day from now on, with Eddie, we're going to have this. This is our golden shoe. This is our trophy to signify Marco Wilson's thrown shoe that cost Florida the game against LSU.
In honor of Billy Napier having some trouble with the water bottle and having some issues with the rural fans, here's what we've got here. It's Billy Napier's swamp water here, made in a basement in a rural part of Central Florida. It feels good to be a Gator hater here today. How much fun is all that, man? That's so great. Cody Chaffins did a great job with that, and obviously, we've had a lot of gimmicks over the years when it comes to Georgia, Florida. We love doing that. They're still on our desk here right now. Eddie's here just as much as he's ever been. He's got a different blindfold now than he had in the video you just saw. Our Billy Napier swamp water is still here. The rural folks down there in Central Florida, they're still getting some love from us in a way they did not get from their own coach. On the wall behind me, I don't know if we can show that. We still got the original Golden Shoe trophy. It's back here in the back. That's still here, too. So all of these artifacts still alive and well when it comes to the lousy, stinking Gators and the cocktail party on Saturday. So all of that is really fun, and a great job by Cody Chaffins and a great job of the Finish Long Drink making it. There's the Golden Shoe. Look at that. Great job. Got to zoom in on that. Still as proud as it ever was. So I've told the story before, and we're so late. But so my family, my wife, my 2 kids, they helped me make that. And I've told this story before. I won't get into the whole thing now. There's a sort of a special kind of an emotional connection for me to that goes beyond just making fun of Florida. I've talked about that before. I'll save that for another time, although many of you maybe know that story. So that's going to live with us forever. You know, some of the stuff eventually we sort of cycle out. Golden Shoe is not going anywhere. The Georgia Bulldogs have gotten another. That is really good. Such a thrill. And such a fun thing. By the way, thanks to the Finish Long Drink to make it all possible. As you're getting ready to get stocked up for your cocktail party this weekend, enjoy yourself some Finish Long Drink. Peach-flavored version, as we take over the state of Florida, showing them that peach-flavored version of the Finish Long Drink. That goes great. Long Drink cranberry, the blue can, the grapefruit flavor. That's the traditional. That's the sort of the citrus flavor. I love that. How about the Long Drink Strong? That's 8.5% alcohol by volume. A lot of great choices. Pick the one up that you think you'll love, because I know you will. In fact, keep on enjoying that same one you've always been loving, because it's been with you for a long time if you're like me. Online, thelongdrink.com for more on that. Thelongdrink.com for more on that. So to wrap up here today, so many golden shoes to give you. This is an old school traditional Friday shoes dump for us, but why not as you roll into a cocktail party weekend? First one there on the screen. How about this coming in from a guy named Joe, I believe it's Iriarty, who writes in to say that he lives in Jessup. I probably mispronounced his last name, Joe, I apologize. But he let me know that he's got a retired attorney in his town named Bob Smith, who this weekend will be attending his 70th Georgia-Florida game. Isn't that amazing? 70 trips to see Georgia and Florida. Joe, I appreciate you sharing that to Mr. Smith. Congratulations on an incredible milestone, and obviously, I hope you enjoy that one again this weekend, and a golden shoe going out to all the folks there in Jessup, Georgia for that. Next one here coming up too, Texas Dog sharing Apollo. Dog ripping up on that Gator toy. We love to see that. We'll give a golden shoe to Texas Dog, who, by the way, now lives, I believe he's told us, in the state of Georgia. So golden shoe going there. Another golden shoe now going out to Marv, the author, who writes in for Florida Hate Week for these lousy, stinking Gators. You see the Georgia Bulldog there wearing the gator skin cleats. He also had a song attached to this too. The big tech platforms don't like it when we play music, but good stuff from Marv on that. We'll give him a golden shoe for that. Another golden shoe now going out to our buddy Robin, who always gives us good stuff. He says, nightmare at Everbank Stadium. Happy Halloween. Going to be a nightmare. Hashtag Gator Hater. Tagging DawgNation Daily. Barkalot always gives us great golden shoe submissions. That's certainly another one of those. Next golden shoe here, going to Ohio, Georgia Bulldog, who gives us the happy Halloween. The Peanuts characters, Charlie Brown and Snoopy, with their Georgia hats turned backwards. I'll tell you this. I don't think Ohio Dog knew this, but I'll tell you. I love Peanuts. I'm a big Charlie Brown fan, big Snoopy fan, always have. We watch a ton of Peanuts-related content at home. My poor kids, they essentially subjected to all that kind of stuff all the time. Huge fan of Peanuts. So I love to see the Georgia Peanuts tie there on that. Good job by Bill there. Another golden shoe going out to Kitsy Ann here, who shares this, made by, is it Lazonian who made this? I can't quite read the watermark on that, but a really cool version of what appears to be almost like Jason from the Friday the 13th movies in honor of Halloween. Dressed in red and black, got the Georgia G, got the knife. We'll allow this for Halloween. We typically don't do violence for the golden shoe, but in kind of a Halloween theme here, we'll sort of allow that. We'll let Kitsy Ann get a golden shoe for that. I told you we had a shoes dump for you. We'll keep them going now. Another golden shoe going out to Dina Pruitt, who shares a T-shirt that says, "Some people think Georgia versus Florida is a matter of pride and respect, but it is much more serious than that." She says, "One of my all-time favorite T-shirts. I drag it out every year. Bought it in Jacksonville just before the 2007 game, which was obviously a great win for Georgia. Hashtag Gator Hater. Dina Pruitt will give you a golden shoe for that." Another golden shoe going out to John Paul Williams. Stories like this I love. He sends a picture of himself sitting on that gator statue saying, "Beat those lousy, stinking Gators." He writes in to say, "Here's a submission for the golden shoe. My wife, my nephew, Thomas John, we're all heading down today for our first ever cocktail party. Go Dogs." I love when folks have a chance as a family to do stuff like that, especially when it's for the first time. Hope you have a great time. We love the picture there. Love to see Georgia fans already enjoying the cocktail party weekend. So to John Paul Williams and everybody, hope you have a great time with that. How about another golden shoe as well? Going out to our buddy, the General Buster Grant, who's making fun here of some of those Gator taxis that you sometimes see in Jacksonville. He says, hashtag Gator Hater, hashtag Go Dogs. That is funny stuff. We love the General. We'll give him a golden shoe. And then another golden shoe here as well. So we got Joe there on that a little earlier. Is that all the golden shoes? Did we get them all there? Yeah, so we got them all there. So we told you it was a lot of them here today. We wanted to do a lot of good vibes here going into a weekend, so we appreciate that. And one more reminder. Here's what tomorrow is all about. How about our Gator Hater Updater? Where does that count stand right now? 1,455 days. That's how long it's been since Florida has beaten Georgia. That's what it's all about rolling into tomorrow. So keep that number climbing. Keep a good thought. If you're going, be careful, but have a great time. Be loud in the stadium. If you're watching at home, send good vibes from wherever you are. We'll see you after the game for our DawgNation postgame show throughout the day on video. And, of course, at DawgNation.com. Moments like this, what we live for. Enjoy it. And then back here Monday for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised. The price is promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that today. Yes, sir.
Got some breaking news here.
Breaking news.
Hold
on, before you say this, is this good breaking news or bad breaking news?
Depends on if you like the Georgia game in Jacksonville.
All right, here we go.
Future schedule for the Georgia-Florida game. We already know that it will be in Atlanta in 2026, Tampa in 2027, and then we'll stay in Jacksonville from 2028 through 2031.
So there you go. Oh, so that's interesting. Now, Jay, you may not, by the way, this is the voice of our producer, Jay Black, doing a great job as always. I don't know the answer to this, and perhaps you don't either. That length of contract, 28, 29, 30, that's only a 4-year deal. Is that the typical length of the contract? That seems shorter to me than some of these have been. Do we know that?
Feels about, I think it's been like 3, 4, 5 years.
Okay.
So it feels about average.
Okay, all right. So, you use the old line as expected. It was expected this would remain in Jacksonville after that stadium renovation. The Jacksonville mayor at one point in time said that the most important event that takes place in Jacksonville every year is the Georgia-Florida game. There was a major push by the city to keep this game there. Georgia and Florida have both openly acknowledged they like the money they get from this. So now it is official. Stadium renovations for 2 years, and then back in Jacksonville after that through at least 2031. Perhaps longer than that, but the shorter term on the contract, meaning shorter not than it could be, not shorter than it has been in the past, the shorter term on the contract allowing for a chance at renegotiating after that period of time is up. So it'll be a state-of-the-art facility, but it'll look far different than it's looked before. I think that next year is probably one of those things where probably should plan on doing it up big for Georgia, Florida next year, because obviously you'll have 2 years of not having it. And then when you come back, not that it's a bad thing to have a nicer, newer stadium, but it will be a much different experience. And listen, the Jacksonville Stadium is by far and away now the worst stadium in the NFL. Very, very narrow corridors. We've obviously been lucky to see Georgia play in a lot of NFL stadiums, and they're all pretty nice, but not this one. This one's not nice at all. But this new one probably will be nice. And as one of our commenters pointed out yesterday, if you look here at the rendition, there's a lot of SoFi Stadium vibe with that, where it's like it's still basically an open air stadium just with the roof on top, which is interesting because, I don't believe you could play a Final Four there. I don't think you could play like a basketball game indoors there the way that obviously you could at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and a lot of those NFL stadiums have that opportunity to do that. Cannot do that there, I would not think. But they kind of like at least having, because, the weather's typically pretty nice in Jacksonville. They like having all of that. So that is now made official. We were anticipating that announcement to come out soon. So there you go. We're also going to give you now that's interesting because, if I'm seeing that rendition correctly, that's open air. Like, can you play a basketball game in open air conditions? Because, a lot of y'all were in L.A. for the national championship. When it was raining, people were getting wet. The SoFi Stadium is essentially an outdoor stadium with a roof. The thing cost nearly $2 billion. I would say it's, designed poorly, like much of, California probably is. So interesting to think they're going to try. If that rendition is correct, trying for a Final Four in what is, to my eyes, not a fully enclosed building, that could be interesting to see, but perhaps a different conversation for a different day. Lance D says all of that being done for a half-filled stadium during the NFL season. Perhaps that's the case. Have big watch parties in there for the London games. Also, you got to make room for, at the stadium now, they have that daily place off to the side, which is where obviously our friends at AEW have had some big events before. That's really the best export from Jacksonville right now is, of course, All Elite Wrestling. Doggone Tap says, I don't think enough's been made of the fact that we lost the turnover battle 4-1 to Alabama, but only lost by one score in the final margin. He says it's crazy. Also looking forward to that game against Florida tomorrow. Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. Lance D says those stadiums don't have any intimidation factor with them. Mercedes-Benz is a beautiful stadium, but no atmosphere for a big game. So, Lance, to that point, I saw one of these like gambling experts. For whatever reason, I'm kind of interested in like gambling experts' opinions. I just think that they're putting work into the opinions they come up with. They're not always right, but they're putting a lot of work into it. What this guy said the other day is that he only values home field advantage in the NFL about 1.5 points now, where commonly, consistently, home field advantage has been like 3 points. But he's only valuing that at 1.5 points right now. But I think for the reason you just mentioned, these much nicer NFL stadiums where the tickets are much more expensive, it's a much more corporate crowd here right now, and they're not making noise like they used to, which I got to tell you, from a college football standpoint, I do worry about. When the get-in price for Georgia, Texas is like nearly $1,000, at what point in time, do we arrive at where the only people going to the games are the sort of rich people that don't cheer? You do worry about that some, don't you? Wyatt Fielden says, big day tomorrow for Trevor Etienne and Carson Beck. What high school game are we doing tonight? So we got Prince Avenue Christian and Hebron Christian Academy tonight. Two great smaller classification private schools in Georgia. They're battling for a region championship. A lot of major college prospects. You'll also recognize a lot of the names for Prince Avenue. Greg Vandergriff, that's Brock's dad. He's the coach. One of Mike Bobo's sons is one of the quarterbacks for Prince Avenue Christian. Scott Cochran's son plays for Prince Avenue Christian. Todd Hartley's son, I believe, is a not a varsity player, but he's up and coming as like an 8th grader for Prince Avenue Christian, I believe. Former UGA letterman, they play for Prince Avenue Christian. Hebron's got like 3 4-star prospects. It's a good game. It's a good game. Really good game for us tonight. Let me go to Facebook here for a moment, see how Facebook folks are doing here today. We'll also give you a pick here coming up. We talked about A&M in South Carolina. We'll give you our official pick for that here coming up in just a bit, too. That's a really good one Saturday. A really interesting game. Whereas, I like A&M overall, but, we just keep asking about that week to week to week grind. How many teams are really capable of playing great football 3 weeks in a row? That has been, that's been a real caution light for us with some of these picks here this year. And for the most part, we've kind of gotten that right. Over here on Facebook for a moment. Michael Castleberry says, it's Friday, and I still hate TU. I believe he's talking about Texas. Yeah, there you go. Renita Flowers checking in from Amelia Island, by the way. One of the great spots for Georgia-Florida weekend. That's why we love the cocktail party. We love places like Amelia Island and Fernandina Beach, and obviously all through the Golden Isles there in Georgia. We love that part of the world. We really do. Scott Gentry says, let me get this from Scott. By the way, good to see Ben Green in here today. I feel like we hadn't seen Ben in a little while. Ben's a great guy. He says, Saturday's going to be one in the trenches. Can our defensive line put Lagway in his backside or at least in the pocket? And can our offensive line keep back clean? Scott, I think that's a really good point. I think it's a very good analysis of Saturday's game. Ben Green says we need to start comments are coming fast. Let me scroll back. He says we need to start a program to get rowdy fans in at a discount. The ticket price really is getting too high for a lot of the rowdy fans. It is true. The more money you spend on a ticket sometimes, the less willing to be rowdy in the venue you are. That's not always true, but a lot of times it's true. Because like what ends up happening is, and you see this in all professional sports. I mean, ask Dallas Cowboys fans about what's happened to them since Jerry World is open. Lakers at the not the United Center, what do you call it? I guess it's crypto.com now. It used to be the Staples Center. That once the venue becomes the sort of see and be seen place, and even Texas the other night, it's like a bunch of celebrities, right? It's like you got Joe Rogan and Matthew McConaughey and what's his face from Top Gun Maverick. All these people are like on the sideline. It's like once it's like the place that celebrities are, well, now all of the sort of wannabe celebrities are coming too, and it's more about the doing it for the gram than it is about actually being there to cheer and make noise. That's an oversimplification, but it is true. It's like once these tickets reach a high enough price, it becomes a situation where the people that are coming now want to be there because the tickets are in high demand. Whereas what drives up the demand are the fans that want to be there for the right reasons. Ben Green says it's the cost of being an elite program. To a certain extent that it is. I mean, a lot of y'all are going to be Georgia fans through thick and thin. You'll be around Georgia no matter what. But that's not what everybody is. I mean, there's just going to be more bandwagons. There's just going to be more stuff like that. And, while it's cool to see the fan base grow, it does make, things a little bit more expensive for the average person. Bernard Blackburn says, I pay that money. I'm getting my yelling and my team spirit going. They'll know I was there. I love that. That's awesome. By the way, Eric DeVorncy shouting out a big game coming up tonight down there in Middle Georgia. There are a lot of those. Perry versus Warner Robins. Yeah. Amazing how many former state champs are all in that same region. Amazing. So that's a good one there in Middle Georgia. Wintersville Classic tonight too. That is really good as well. Let me get some DawgNation.com comments. Then we'll get our pick for our Go With The Flow preview. UGA Marine says, I agree that once it's no longer about the ball program, the experience falls off. Yeah, I mean, look, the college atmosphere is just so special. And when you're in one of these big games where everybody's making a bunch of noise, it's just one of the great feelings you can ever have. You really feel connected to something larger than just your own life. It really is a quasi-spiritual experience. It really is. I don't go to as nearly as many NFL games, but I am being told by a lot of people that you just don't get a ton of that in the NFL anymore. The NFL has essentially become a television product. They don't care if you go to the games or not. They're making so much money off of television that the in-stadium crowd is essentially nothing more than a live studio audience. That's all that really is at this point. Thomas T-Bone 86, yeah, Go With The Flow is back in full form here today. Our official pick on Georgia, Florida, and all the other big games. DT says if the Jacksonville Stadium doesn't fit a fixed seating designed for 12-year-olds, it doesn't matter what changes they make. Seats are narrow. Rows are so narrow my knees, get mashed in the seat in front of me. Yeah, it's pretty tight in there. I would also say that, compared to the stadiums today, the concourses are really narrow, and that's really hard to walk. No secret, a lot of the people are probably drunker before a game like this and other games. A bunch of drunk people trying to walk through narrow concourses gets really hard. It really does. I would agree with that. That will be better. And by the way, Georgia's done a great job on that north side of the stadium. The way they've widened those concourses over there, much easier to get around at Georgia now, I would say. Savannah Bryan says, I don't understand Jacksonville. It's hot all season. Close it up and put a retractable roof in case you want to open it up for a nice day. Well, I think that's kind of what it is. I think it is retractable, unless I'm wrong about that. I believe that's the case. UGA Marine also liked the golden shoe of Jason, the cowboy hat. Yeah, DT also, two big games tonight. You got Douglas County and Carrollton, Valdosta at Lowndes. I mean, obviously, I think right now, Carrollton's been on such a run all year long that you kind of wonder if anyone's going to be able to beat them at the moment. They almost look like they're putting some distance between themselves and much of the rest of 6A. But I tell you right now, Douglas County's got some real talent. Very good wide receivers. Aaron Gregory did commit to Texas A&M the other day. They were better when we saw them to begin the season against Cedar Grove. They were better on defense than I expected them to be. Had a tough game. We saw them the second time against Gainesville, but a really talented team. There's a little bit of, I think, rivalry feel between Douglas County and Carrollton. They're probably a little closer than you realize. There's some overlap with the players. That's probably pretty juicy. And then Valdosta and Lowndes, just a really fun game. Really fun game. Obviously, you got Adam Carter trying to build that Lowndes program after having been at Grayson. And then you got Valdosta, trying to resurrect themselves with Shelton Felton. Of course, Valdosta a couple of weeks ago, surprisingly upset by Richmond Hill, trying to get back on the winning side of things here. All right, we're going to get ready to make our picks here. So let's do this. Good comments. Thanks for a great week, y'all. We love these rivalry games. It's a lot of fun. I will see you tomorrow for the DawgNation postgame show. Kaylee's got you for pregame starting at 1:30. Great day coming up in Jacksonville and all around the First Coast. Tonight, Peachtree Sports Network for high school football. We're going to roll in here to our picks for A&M and South Carolina, our best bets for the weekend, starting at noon, and then on demand anytime after that. Go with the flow. All the other picks, including the official pick on Georgia, Florida from the entire DawgNation team and our buddy Dari Payer of Morris Andrews. So check out all of that. Enjoy that. And then, listen, hopefully back here on Monday, all of this Gator hater stuff that we make a big part of our week, hopefully we're enjoying another win against Florida. And, man, think about everything that comes up after that for UGA. We have reached the actual stretch drive of this season. So get ready for it. Check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. It's been hot, stays hot. Halloween was hot. So get your AC tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Find them online, rsandrews.com for more on that. And get you a taste here of Go With The Flow, presented by RS Andrews. And I'll see you back here Monday, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Hello, DawgNation Daily viewers, and of course, our regular commenters as a part of our RS Andrews Cool Down. Each and every Friday here on our show, we also give you a taste of what we do on Go With The Flow, presented by RS Andrews. Some of the big picks around college football. This week, the show, of course, Georgia, Florida, Ohio State, Penn State. A lot of fun to be had. We hope you'll check that out. It debuts starting at noon today, then on demand anytime after that. Check that out. Probably the best way to watch that is on the DawgNation YouTube page. I hope that you will see that there. But as a taste of what you get as a part of the RS Andrews Cool Down, let's also, or I should say, Go With The Flow, presented by RS Andrews here on the RS Andrews Cool Down. Let's give you a little bit of a free pick here. And I think this may be pound for pound as much fun as anything's going to be in the SEC here this week. Texas A&M, hottest team in the league right now, going to South Carolina. These are teams that have, believe it or not, played a lot. They were permanent opponents for each other when A&M first entered the league in 2012, and I believe they played for a trophy, like the Davy Crockett Trophy or something like that, something along those lines. Either way, A&M goes to South Carolina. Aggies find themselves as 2.5-point favorites in Williams-Brice Stadium for Saturday. Mike Griffith, give us your thoughts here on the Aggies playing at the Gamecocks.
It almost seems too obvious, doesn't it? The hottest team in the league against a South Carolina team we've seen the best and worst of. I think the Aggies are going to bring out the worst of Shane Beamer and the Gamecocks. I think the Yell squad is going to have plenty to shout about. Give me the Aggies and lay the points.
So Mike Griffith on the side of the favorite in that spot. Jeff Santel, what about for you?
Yeah, this is a game that you wonder if, everybody that's seeking chaos in college football with the playoff, they're really going to be eating their popcorn, watching, plugged into this one. I just don't think it's going to happen. I think Mike Elko's doing a lot of great things there already in year one at Texas A&M that maybe Shane Beamer has yet to materialize in a few seasons in Columbia. I like the Aggies. I like the Aggies to keep the train going for that big Texas matchup. Give me the Aggies on the road in a big way here.
Boy, Gig'em getting a lot of love here right now. Connor Riley, what about for you?
Doing the same thing I'm doing as Ohio State. Penn State came in ready to pick A&M because I thought people were going to be on the underdog, but since people love the favorite so much in this case, I'm going to take South Carolina. I think their defensive line is going to make things very difficult, and I think South Carolina is going to get very weird on offense and find a way to win this game.
Kaylee Manziel, you hear an outright pick for the upset from Connor on South Carolina. What about for you, Gamecocks getting 2.5 at home?
This game has all the makings of an upset. Night game. You've got a team that controls their own destiny with everything to lose, and you've got a South Carolina Shane Beamer team, pretty much nothing to lose. South Carolina hasn't been able to win that big game at home. It's been really, really close. I don't know. The way this season has gone, it's just been a little bit too smooth for the Aggies, so I'm going to take South Carolina.
So Kaylee on the side of South Carolina. For me, it sort of looks like one of those deals where a little bit like on Go With The Flow, we're going to talk about the surprising line between Auburn and Vanderbilt. To me, this sort of feels like a little bit of a surprising line. It did open at 4. Maybe that's a little less surprising. But given how hot Texas A&M has been of late and all the talk about them having the inside track to the SEC championship, it's like you almost expect to see them a slightly larger favorite than they are. Someone scarfed up the 4 to begin the week. It's now, I'm talking about rubber stamped, just absolutely painted 2.5 across the board. When you look at the juice on the number, you don't really get the sense that's moving to 3 anytime soon. This is clearly a situation where the half-point looms large, but also the fact that it's, kind of commonly found Gamecocks 2.5, that shows a level of respect in place for South Carolina here too, that even with all the winning that Texas A&M has done as of late, not enough to kind of move them to the key number of 3, the full field goal favorite. So I'm going to lean on the logic that I've used pretty successfully all year long. Ask yourself a question. Who wins a big game at home against a top 10 ranked LSU and then goes on the road and makes it look easy the following week? Typically speaking, only the best teams in the country do that, especially for a team in Texas A&M where you're talking about, rattling off a long winning streak here. Even in SEC play alone, they've won 4 straight in the SEC. Actually, I should say 5 straight in the SEC here this season, just looking at conference games here. We've kind of hit the pause button a little bit on LSU last week and got that right. A couple of times here we've said, hey, maybe a little too much too soon. I think for me, it's that kind of situation here for Texas A&M. I would be surprised if they lost the game, but I do think there's enough respect here for South Carolina to take a flyer on the home team, just given the fact that you're talking about having to go into a hostile environment a week after an emotional win at home, big second-half comeback required there. So I do think that South Carolina plus 2.5 is probably the play here. That puts the flow on the side of South Carolina too, perhaps somewhat surprisingly, but nonetheless, flow on the side of the Gamecocks. Dari, you want to go with the flow and take South Carolina?
I love the Gamecocks here. That defensive front for South Carolina is going to be the difference in this game, controlling that line of scrimmage. And I think Shane is going to channel some inner dad Beamer ball and get a special teams big play that's going to be the other difference in this game.
All right, so that'd be fun to watch out for. And those are all of our picks. The other 5 games you'll see as a part of Go With The Flow, and that our 6th pick, which will also count on our season-long standings. And now, before we say goodbye to you, we'll kind of expand things out and give you the rest of our thoughts on the board. You can dig deep for this. You can look at totals. You can look at sides. You can look at anything from the upcoming college football weekend. Mike, do you have a best bet to share with us?
I do. And I don't think it's a novel one because I see that Oregon and Michigan opened with Oregon as a 2.5-point favorite. That line, BA, now up to 14.5, and it's still not enough. I'm going to take Oregon to win very big in the Big House. Take the Ducks, give 14.5 to the Wolverines.
So, Mike, on the side of Oregon right there, Jeff Sintel, any best bets for you?
Yeah, I got one, and I think this might be the toughest game to pick on the entire docket. It is basically, if you're a Halloween kid, it's kind of like you go to the dentist's house and they give you dental floss versus maybe some mouthwash type of matchup. Of course, I could only be talking about North Carolina at the Doak, FSU. Which team stinks worse? I get the feeling here that kind of the way I feel about Kentucky, that's just not really a serious football team right now. I think the Seminoles, even though they're at home and they need some good juju, I think they've pretty much checked out under Norvell for a while. I like the Tar Heels to go in and kind of win the battle of the very bads. Give me the Tar Heels there. I think the line's at 2.5. Carolina's giving up 2.5. I think the Tar Heels will roll in that one.
Okay, so Connor Riley, how about some best bets from you?
Yeah, we're going to stick in the ACC where BA obviously doesn't want us to talk about or pick any games in there. You know, he's got his SEC bias, and that's okay. We're going to give the ACC some love here. I've got two games. I've got Duke at Miami, the sleepy noon start. I've got Duke covering a 20.5 point spread. This is a Manny Diaz revenge game after I think they kind of shanked him out of that job there at Miami. And I expect this Duke team at least to be able to keep it close. I don't know if they're going to win the game outright, but 20.5 for a Miami team that coming off that Florida State win, I don't know what their level of excitement for taking on a Duke team is going to be. So give me Duke there. The other one, big matchup this week between SMU and Pitt, could very well determine possible ACC championship game. Pitt is a 7.5 point road dog. I like Pitt to go in and cover that spread against SMU. So I've got Pitt plus 7.5 and Duke plus 20.5 to ACC underdogs, something we will not hear much talk about on Go With The Flow so long as one Brandon Adams is picking games.
I will say this, though. I do love the fact that we've reached the Manny Diaz revenge game portion of the show. Like, low-key, the best bets where we get a chance to pick anything on the board is actually one of my favorite parts of the entire week because I just always love to hear what people bring up. Kaylee Manziel, that includes you, too. What kind of best bet situation you got for us here?
I want to revisit Ohio State, Penn State. I don't know if their defenses are actually as good as everyone says or if they just have sucky offenses. It really could go either way, but I like the under a lot in that game, 47.5. I think last year it was like 20-12. So I like this to be a super low scoring game. So give me under 47.5 with Ohio State and Penn State.
I also like an under here, too, and it's also a game that Mike mentioned a little earlier. You know, ever since Oregon beat Ohio State, we've seen some kind of like Kirby Death March-ish type behavior from Dan Lanning in Oregon. They were 38-9 last week against Illinois. They were 35-0 the week before against Purdue. We took the under in that spot, and we sailed under that total. And so we're going to do the same thing here again. A Michigan team that couldn't score in an empty field. The number here is 45.5. I think Dan Lanning's more than happy to get in, get out. I love the under between Oregon and Michigan. I may like that as much as anything on the board here this week. Also, kind of a weird flyer from my other pick here. I like Rice plus 10.5 against Navy. Look, one of the things that has been low-key pretty profitable last couple of years are leaning on these teams with interim coaches. We haven't seen a lot of coaching firings here this year. Rice did fire their coach, Mike Bloomgren, here this week. It's also a Navy team coming off a blowout loss last week to Notre Dame. Now, oftentimes the Service Academy shakes stuff like that off. But a little bit of a sort of a dip down in competition here this week, fresh off a blowout loss. Perhaps a little bit more motivation from a Rice team that, you know, sees a chance for a resurrection under a new coach. Players have a chance to earn themselves more playing time. Whatever it is, interim coaches have done pretty well in college football the last couple of years. So I'm going to take a flyer on the Owls, plus 10.5 against Navy, and I love the under 45.5 for Oregon and Michigan. Dari Payro, how about for you?
Well, I gotta choose the Armed Forces game here. So I really, 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 really love the over 41.5 in the Army Air Force game. I think Army can get close to that number by themselves. I like Clemson to continue to cover against Louisville. I think that's at 11.5 or 11 points. Love Clemson there. I think they're going to win by more than 14. Those are my 2 picks.
So interesting that Tyler Shuck, the Louisville quarterback, essentially old enough to be Cade Klubnik's dad. So that's been kind of a storyline there this week. And, of course, the long-standing tradition of unders in the Armed Forces games. But the truth is, as Dari said, the Army offense now, and Navy too to a certain extent, but the Army offense, much more potent, throwing it more than they used to. Perhaps a little passe to kind of, hang those unders every single time those service academies get together the way that has been the tradition of so many college football fans for such really a long time. So either way, a lot of fun picks to be had. We'll make more of those as a part of Go With The Flow starting at noon today on the DawgNation video channels. You can see that on demand anytime after that. DawgNation YouTube, most convenient spot for that. Georgia, Florida, Ohio State, Penn State, everything else. Check that out there. And with that said, we'll get you back to the R.S. Andrews Cool Down.